from the Washington, D.C. area. It's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm your host tonight for Inside Scoop. We're going to be talking about women in politics, one of my favorite subjects. And my guest tonight is Stephanie Clifford. Some of you may know Stephanie because she is very active in Northern Virginian Democratic politics. She is the 8th CD representative to the Women's Caucus of the Democratic Party of Virginia. She has served on the Arlington Commission for Women, and she also sits on the board of the Arlington Gay and Lesbian Association. And of course, it's very big news for us tonight, and we'll go into that in a few minutes. I just want to welcome you. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for agreeing to be on the show tonight.
Thanks, Catherine. Happy to be here.
She, in real life, runs the wellness program through the Human Resources Department for NPR. Mm-hmm. So you are no stranger to broadcast journalism.
No, absolutely. So my job isn't quite on the radio side of NPR, but I take care of all of them, look for their health and happiness, and keep everybody on air happy too.
They sound like they're happy when they're on the air, actually.
I hope so.
So I'm going to just back up for a second and talk about the fact, first of all, that we got very exciting news. It's important to me and you. I sit on the board of Equality Virginia. You sit on the board of AGLA. There's a big party at Freddy's for everybody who is not watching our broadcast tonight or wants someplace to go. It's Freddy's Beach Bar and Grill for a big celebration because the Fourth Circuit Court struck down the constitutionality of the marriage ban, also known as the Marshall-Newman Amendment to the Virginia Constitution. So federal court has officially said it's unconstitutional. We are now falling in line with numerous other states who have also found these state laws and constitutional amendments to be unconstitutional. So I don't know if either one of us will be invited to weddings immediately.
I would expect so.
But I think they're on the radar for us. I'd also like to take a moment of personal privilege to talk about Teddy Goodson. I'm a member of the City of Fairfax Democratic Committee, and I know you probably know Teddy through the Democratic Business Council and the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. And Teddy was a longtime supporter of candidates and causes, and she fell ill about a year ago, and she is going to be deeply missed. But in honor of Teddy, I want to kind of segue into my conversation with you about women in politics. Let's start with Teddy. Mm-hmm. So Teddy came into this world as a Republican. She was a military brat. She was a military wife. Her role was not as a candidate, it was supporting candidates. And she certainly supported a number of women candidates. She supported plenty of men candidates, but she was unwavering in her belief that the Democratic Party really is the party of the big tent and diversity. Mm-hmm. Knowing how long Teddy worked at this, decades, how far do you think we have come?
I hope that we've come far, and just to share one Teddy story for you too that was recounted to my husband on the way over here. And I didn't know her well. I talked to her a little bit throughout my campaign, but I remember it was maybe about a year after that we were both at an event together, and she just kind of pulled me aside and looked at me. She's like, you know, wherever I find instigators and people shaking things up, you're there, and just had that little smile and twinkle in her eye. I'm like, yeah. You can usually find me amongst those people, but that's what she was about. She just took that moment to share that and to let me know that we were kind of on the same side.
So, and that brings me to something the two of us have in common. You ran in a Democratic primary for the House of Delegates in Arlington. What district?
This was the 49th district.
49th district in 2011.
Right. So this was a primary after Adam Ebbin left the seat. Then Alfonso Lopez and I were in the primary together. Another one of these odd August primaries 3 years ago.
And I also ran for city council unsuccessfully. But let's talk about your decision path to how you decided. How did you come to the conclusion that you were going to run for that seat?
It was really a very sudden thing, and I'll joke about it now when we talk about women have to be asked 7 times in this long drawn out recruitment process, and mine was it's a pretty quick decision when we knew that the delegate was resigning and the seat was coming up, and I've been living in the community and working on these things, and it was just like, okay, well, I guess I'm going for this. So it was really, I don't think, the typical path. And looking back now, it's really kind of what was I thinking? I was somewhat prepared, but I really had no idea of the full breadth of everything I was getting myself into.
I mean, that's what I found too. So somebody says to me, I think you can make a difference. You have, all of the things, the passion, the knowledge, the network, all of the things that people say when they're trying to recruit somebody to run for office, to run for city council. And I felt qualified. And I made the decision to stay and run for office. But I agree with you, until you have actually been a candidate, you are not prepared, no matter how many doors you knock, how many phone calls you make, how instrumental you are in a campaign. You do not know until you are the candidate what's involved. What do you think were some of your biggest challenges in that race?
A lot of it was just not being as well known as you were. You know, I was on the younger side. I'd been heavily involved, but only for a short period of being heavily involved. So no one really knew my name. I didn't have a lot of recognition, and throughout, it's a pretty broad district, so people in Arlington knew me, but people surrounding there didn't know me. Lots of people thought I hadn't been doing enough, hadn't paid my dues, it wasn't my turn, those types of things. So it's really a lot of that when I spoke to voters, that was the easy part, but going around to the current electeds and party members and asking for support and asking for money and trying to first say, who are you and what are you doing here and why are you running, and then getting over to support. And it was hard, but I ended up kind of struggling through and figuring out quickly as I went along, got some good supporters who backed me up and made the difference.
I mean, I found the same thing. Just what you said, knocking the doors was the easy part. Talking to people was the easy part. I loved getting to know the people I was running with. I mean, there were other candidates, both incumbents and new candidates running for city council, and I really enjoyed that part of it. And I enjoyed meeting with civic leaders and community leaders and explaining who I was. That wasn't the difficult part. I think there is something about credibility. There is something about have you paid your dues, have you followed the path, or have you checked off the boxes? And there's a lot of that, I think, in general. I'm a baby boomer, so at 52, I understand that boomers rule the world. And I think that you are somewhere in between Gen X, Gen Y, and let's talk about the challenges that young people have. Regardless of your age, there are a lot of people who are perceived to be young people relative to the people who are currently office holders.
Exactly, and there was that little bit. So I'm 37 now, I was 34 when I ran, so technically a young Democrat, which helps because some people really want young people in there and they want young women, or at least they say they do. But it is kind of hard, especially when you said you're out there knocking on doors. You just really have to, and this was in August heat, 100-degree weather, but making sure you're still wearing a suit and looking professional. And people, some of them will kind of question a few times. They'll look at your grip card, look at the picture. It takes them a little while to realize that you're the candidate when they just keep saying she, like, no, that would be me. But it was a contrast between some people who are like, I don't know about if you have enough experience. People are like, yes, this is what we need going down in Richmond.
So there is kind of a juxtaposition, whereas the party wants young people. They say they want young people, they say they want women candidates, and yet the reality does not seem to be borne out as far as being able to not just recruit, because I think women run, you and I both know women who have run recently, and they run, but they don't win. They don't even win an inter-party nomination process.
Right.
So currently, describe sort of what our party looks like.
And it's a problem, and we have kind of a different perspective here because, you know, I'm from Arlington. We have no shortage of candidates. We have no shortage of young candidates, women candidates. But the rest of the state, I know they're trying hard and trying to recruit women, but they're just not there or not ready for it. Whereas here, we have endless qualified women who are ready to go, but still somehow they're not getting the votes. So it's kind of a contrast.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. So both of us were at the Emerge event yesterday. So Emerge Virginia is a program that trains women candidates or people who think they want to run for office at some point, not necessarily immediately, but women who have an interest in running for office. And so the inaugural class of Emerge Virginia graduated, and the McCulloughs, our governor and his wife, Dorothy, hosted all of us at their home in McLean, and there was a huge turnout. I mean, Dorothy even mentioned that it was like a lot more people than they expected. People don't RSVP anymore. I don't know if that's a whole separate show we can do on why people don't RSVP anymore. So there was an enormous crowd there, but you know, the immediate irony to me as I rocked up to the front door of the McAuliffe House is that there were 4 signs for Mark Warner, John Faust, Don Beyer, and Rip Sullivan. I think Rip had a sign out there. So there were 4 campaign posters for 4 current candidates running for election. They're 4 white men, right? At this party to celebrate the first graduating class of women who want to be candidates. And that irony did not escape me. How do you feel about the commitment those current 4 candidates have to seeing women in office?
I don't know about the candidates themselves. It's kind of tough as far as what the candidates to do, other than people like Rip Sullivan, who's in a safe district, who I'm sure will try and raise money. I haven't seen a lot on the side of most men who are really reaching out. Some did, and there are a lot of women who, when I first was running and throughout the campaign, who are current electeds or other candidates who are just so excited at the idea and very willing to give help. And some men too, but I don't think it's anything formal. It's not, the Old Boys Network doesn't really bring in that many women, and there's nothing else that we can rely on. It's not that they're not, it just, once they become elected, they become part of that formal structure with the House caucus or Senate caucus to try and bring in people that way.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. I was at an event on Saturday for NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. We were talking about messaging. And we were talking about how we've ended up in the situation that we're in when Roe versus Wade was decided in 1972, like way before you were born, I think. Anyway, it was before you were born. I was there, I remember it. But why are we still fighting this battle so many years later? And I point to, what did our legislature look like in 1972? What did the Supreme Court and the White House look like? What did our state legislatures look like in 1972? And how do they look now? Could that be, in some measure, the reason we are still fighting this battle? What do you think?
I think there's very little change. I wish I was just looking at the stats today. I wish I remembered them, but it's not a huge thing. It would be something like 3 governors to 10 governors or something like that. We haven't made any huge strides. And I know we keep coming back to it, I think, just because it's an easy partisan line that we can draw between abortion and anti-abortion. It's just, people think it makes the conversation easy, but it's kind of sad that basically when people talk about women's issues, that's all we talk about.
I know, and it's terrible that it comes down to that issue, but the very fact that after the Supreme Court made a decision, which you would have thought was final, that we keep fighting this battle, and I keep looking at the fact that the people who are debating this are still largely white men, which were the people who originally debated it back in 1972.
Yeah. And in some cases, literally the same men who've been sitting in these seats.
Literally, in some cases, you're absolutely right about that. So I think, what we really need to examine is why there is a need to have women in these seats, why we can't be satisfied with 80% of our legislative body being white men. So when we come back, we'll take a little break, we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about why diversity matters.
Just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm hosting the Inside Scoop tonight. We're talking about women in politics, and my guest tonight is Stephanie Clifford. Very active here in Northern Virginia politics. She's a former candidate, having run for the Democratic nomination for the House of Delegates in 2011. So when we cut to break, we were talking about diversity and the need for diversity, and if we're going to change the conversations that we keep having decade after decade after decade. But let's talk about what diversity means. And it's not just checking off a box for race or for gender. There's a lot of other things, like age, which is something we just talked about. Younger people, older people. But you know, I went to a conference today on poverty that the American Bar Association put on, and one of the panelists was Sister Simone Campbell, who I did not realize is an attorney. She was a practicing attorney in Oakland, California. But Sister Simone is somebody I would like to see in Congress, because I think a nun in Congress would be beneficial. But when I talk about specific people with that specific background, that is diversity well beyond checking off the box of gender. Or geography. The other thing is geography. So what about, could Helen Keller be elected to Congress?
I don't know, quite possibly.
Do you think in this day and age, what about Temple Grandin, the autism advocate? Could she be elected to Congress?
It would be tough, but I would like to see those things be possible.
And that's why when we talk about diversity, we're getting kind of stuck in this conversation of quotas and percentages, like only 17% of our state legislature or our House of Delegates is women. But that does not tell the diversity story. It doesn't talk about socioeconomic status. It doesn't talk about people's personal stories.
No.
For instance, part of Charnel Herring's personal story is that she was homeless at one point. And there are other people who've had other kinds of challenges in their life. And so when you think of diversity, what kinds of women or minority or non-traditional candidates would you like to see run for office?
Right, and that's part of the problem that we have, where we have the idea of a citizen legislature in Virginia, where it's not a full-time legislator, it's not a full-time salary, so you have to have another job, and another job that can support you taking those months off when you need to serve. And I think that's tough for a lot of people. You see lots of the members of the General Assembly are small business owners or lobbies or as lawyers, something that would provide them that flexibility that lots of people can't do. You don't see a teacher in there, you don't see lots of professionals that have a legitimate voice, but there's just no way that they can make it work with their job like most people have to deal with. But there are many types of diversity, and we do need those different voices in there. That it's just not a matter of here's the diversity issues that anybody can speak on. And you mentioned my work at NPR, and this is the same thing that we struggle with, that we want to sound like America, that this isn't just reporting, certain people reporting, we want those voices, those literal voices of the different people and their different perspective, so people hear people who are speaking like them as they speak in their everyday language are the ones telling them what's going on.
So you mentioned teacher. I think that's very interesting because Adif Carney ran for the House of Delegates against Bob Marshall, and he is a Pakistani American, so his parents are of Pakistani origin. He is a former Marine who chose to go into teaching. He teaches 8th grade math. And so a lot of people would probably have very mixed feelings about, is he qualified? I keep coming back to people saying we need more qualified women to run. We need to vote for the best candidate. I love people who say, I'm not interested in whether a candidate is male or female. I'm interested in the best candidate. Okay, so what exactly is the yardstick for that? Like, what does qualified mean?
There's many different kinds of qualification. Some people come in with a strong business background. They started a business, they managed employees. There's different paths to it, and there's no one way of qualifications. And I think that is one thing that will judge women more harshly on. If you look at most women, you don't automatically think, well, she looks like a politician. So you start looking at the resume and start digging deeper. And I got lots of those questions that people just look right in your face and say, I don't think you're qualified. What did you do? What have you done? They want to hear every single thing that you've done on your resume and how it can translate to what you want to do as a legislator, which I don't think we always need to do. Obviously, we want qualified people, and we don't just want any woman running and hope no one just votes for people because they're a woman if they're not qualified. But there are many different paths to it, and there's many different ways you can be a good member.
So I guess that's what when we throw out qualified and we don't really define qualified, or give concrete examples. So, beyond the age and citizenship requirements in the Constitution, that's all the Founding Fathers thought they needed to address as far as who's eligible to run, because it's a democracy. It's a representative form of government where the people in the legislature should represent the people in the community. And so we've got more than 50% women in Virginia, and we don't have that many people representing us. But beyond that, some of the people that you represent are people with disabilities. There are people who are poor. There are people who have all kinds of educational challenges, or they live in a part of the state that doesn't have a lot of job opportunities or educational opportunities. And so when we choose representatives, let's say in a rural part of Virginia, are the people being elected, when we say they are the most qualified candidate, is it resume qualified, they're an attorney? Or would an equally qualified candidate be somebody from the coal fields who actually lived the life of the people they represent? And why don't we culturally say that both of those are valid?
I wish that we did, and that's the problem of people coming in with different levels of experience. But I think it really just comes down to the person, their problem-solving abilities, their judgment. They just need to be able to go in there, know their people, know what the people want, and come up with the legislative solutions to help the people. It's nothing, you don't need this level of qualification when maybe this will do, but there's just so many different ways that you can go about it.
Do you think part of it, though, is reframing to how we talk about these issues? And I'll give an example. A lot of the training programs for women candidates, from my perspective, and we all have different perspectives. From my perspective, it's training women, teaching women how to behave in a way that's acceptable in an environment that has been exclusively controlled by men for about 400 years, right? So they teach you, and I know you have examples of some of the things that you were told in order to navigate this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did go through one of those candidate training programs that was useful and taught you those things. But it is really saying, here's what's worked for the people who are currently in there here. Here's how we'll try and mold you into this. But I was joking on some of the things that I've heard are, the women candidates will tell you, never carry a purse, always have your hands free, always be dressed up, always have your nails done, always have your toes done. And those are things you would never ever think of mentioning to a man, that anything to do beyond just pulling together a nice suit, that you don't think of. But lots of it is even more strategy-wise, that when I spoke to women, it was, okay, well, have you checked this box? Have you called every single member of the elected people in your area? Then you go through and call every member of the party, then you call this group of people, and then you go and you meet with this person, this person, this person. It was very prescriptive, and it was very daunting. And I can see why, if you told a lot of women this, it would be intimidating. If you think, these people don't know who I am, and suddenly I'm calling all my senators and county board members and all these people, and that's my very first step. Seems pretty scary. When I spoke to some of the men who were elected, they told me, just get a grip card together, don't worry too much about exactly what's on it, and get out there and start knocking on doors and call everybody you know and ask them for money. It was just very throw yourself into it. They still would tell you to make all those calls along the way too, but there was no hesitation, there was no delay, there was no building, there was no take years to build up your resume. You should have decided 10 years ago that you were going to run and have all your friends who can give you $1,000 tomorrow if you need it. It was why would you not do this? And even when I was talking to men about next steps, they're like, well, this other seat is coming up. Why don't you do this one? Why don't you run for this one? Why don't you run for this one? And some people would just be like, maybe you should just run for school board, do the traditional route. You just start at school board, and then if you do well enough there, then you can move up.
You have just described the world of women in politics, at least in Northern Virginia. You have nailed it. So this brings up, you're describing how men approach this differently from women, brings up a book that I love called The Confidence Code. It's written by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman. And they really talk about how women are very, very different from men. And some of the research they did is that when it comes to confidence versus competence, women think it's all about being competent, and that if we're super competent, people will notice. We'll get the promotion, we'll get the bonus, we'll get the job, we'll get the credibility because we're so competent. When in fact, confidence is people's perception of your competence. So they did this research and found that if there's a promotion or a job opportunity and there's a list of 10 things, if men have 6 of them, they'll go, oh my gosh, I can so do this job. And women will go, oh my gosh, if I don't have 10 of those, I can't apply for that. I'm not qualified.
Yeah.
And so you find this in business. You find this in so many avenues where women are like, but it says I have to do and be and have all these things, and I don't have them all yet, so I can't do this. Men, meanwhile, are like, well, I'll try. If it doesn't work, I'll just try something else or I'll try again. Their level of resiliency seems to be far greater than women's. Has that been your experience?
I think so, because I had plenty of men who told me like, well, I didn't get on my first time either, so I tried and I tried and tried again. But I find that in business too, I've been fooled on hiring people a couple times who do that too, where they're just so sure about their own abilities. They're like, well, they must be able to do the job, and they're clearly not qualified, but they can't even accurately judge how unqualified that they are. But I'll do the same thing. I'll look at a new job I'm interested in. It'll say they need 7 years experience. I'm like, I only have 5 years experience. Oh, well, I can't apply for that. That would not stop a lot of people.
It is exactly it. So I was having a conversation with Monique from Casa de Virginia the other day, and she said the same thing, that she'd just gotten an appointment to a commission because Nancy Rodriguez encouraged her. And she goes, I never would have applied because I did not think I was qualified. And that to me is just this whole thing that all the training programs in the world are not necessarily going to change women's perception, that unless we can check off every box, meet every requirement, or feel confident that before we even start, we've mastered it, that we will not try. I mean, I do recognize that that's part of it, but I do think another important part of this conversation is the fact that we train women to try to work into an existing system, and I see it as like throwing women against a wall to see if any of them will stick. Like, just throw a bunch at the wall. Some of them are bound to stick. We throw more and more stick.
Right.
But we don't have conversations about changing the wall. Like, you throw somebody against marble, it's different from throwing them against corkboard, for instance. One's a little stickier than the other.
Right.
So shouldn't we be having a conversation not about how to recruit more women to throw themselves against the wall? Should we be talking about why the wall needs to change?
Right, and it's just making sure women who are running are really aware of what this job entails. As we're saying, if you look at the Virginia State House, it was meant to be a citizen legislature. This was something that people can come into as not a full-time job, but you learn, and you think most smart women, they can figure out jobs very quickly. And you'll have other people there, you have mentors, you have people who can help figure it out. I was talking to a man who's an elected official now who ran at a very young age and was elected, but another position, and I found myself saying, like, I don't know if I would be ready for that one. I don't know enough about that. I don't know the structure and the budgets. He's like, you figured out, I knew nothing when I got in there, but you figure it out very quickly. So there's nothing that should be holding us back to be afraid of these things that we can pick up as everything else. Every job I've ever had, I basically redefined it as I went along too, and ended up being a new title just for me, and it works.
Well, I think that, and when we get back, we are going to discuss a little bit more about how we need to address both aspects of this, both individual women candidates, and I think we need to talk a little bit about the environment and how we start changing the environment in which we expect women to run, so that it's a little greater chance.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed. My guest tonight is Stephanie Clifford. We are talking about women in politics. We are both former candidates, unsuccessful candidates, which gives you an even different perspective. And what we're talking about tonight is, everyone talks about the fact that we want more women to run, and how much of that is really just getting women to step up, and how much of that is kind of, I would call it, innovating how we do politics. Not to make it more women friendly, but to make it more inclusive. Like I said, people with disabilities, young people, people from a disadvantaged background who have pulled themselves up and gotten an education. How do we innovate a different way to be inclusive? Do you have thoughts about that?
I mean, there's always technology. There's no one who can't be involved online if they want to be involved online. So people who might have mobility issues, can't really get out, don't have the funds to travel or to go to all these events. There's a lot you can do to be an advocate online to follow all these issues as well. But when we're talking about young people, I'm seeing a completely different group of young women coming forward, even younger than me, who are very excited to run. But as much as we keep talking about women need an issue that pulls them in, there's something with their kids' school, there's something in their neighborhood that draws them into politics. These women, there's no issue. They just have known for years that they want to run. They're in college, they try and figure out where they should be moving to try and run. They're looking at everything that they're doing on when their career, their resume, their family, their future plans are, I want to be elected. And as we were talking with the emerged graduates yesterday, there were some who had very legitimate plans that they were working for, and some had just decided they wanted to run and just wanted to be ready for when the opportunity came forward.
And I think that's important. But here's something that I've noticed. Well, Mark Rozelle, when he kind of did a debrief on the McAuliffe campaign, and he was saying that it was really women of color that got Terry McAuliffe elected. White married women overwhelmingly supported Cuccinelli, and young 20-something demographically white young women, college students, supported Terry, or they support historically Democratic candidates. And so Mark Rozelle was saying that has been that way for just decades and decades, that young women in college tend to be liberal, tend to be progressive, they want to save the world, change the world, and suddenly they get married and they're Republicans. And we have to kind of look at that when we talk about women in politics. This is not talking about just Democratic women in politics. This is talking about there's just a shortage of women in both parties that are coming forward to run. But what happens? But you and I both saw the young women the other night at the Arlington Young Democrats put on that wonderful panel. And there was a diverse group of young women, millennials, Gen Y there. But are they all going to stay with this if they don't see a path or don't get a win early on?
No, and this, as we mentioned, I work with the Women's Caucus, and this is one thing we're going to have an event, a conversation about coming up. There are these generational issues, because we have the young women who are very involved. They're the boots on the ground. They're the ones running the campaigns, and then we have our wonderful older Democratic women who are the ones who know the communities. They've been around. They've done hundreds of these campaigns. There's nothing new to them. They know every player. They know every corner. They know every trick that's been tried and not tried, and can tell you exactly what's going on. But we are losing that group in the middle, some of them maybe to Republicans. And I think it just probably becomes a family-focused issue, which isn't bad. Obviously, we love families, but I think what I've heard from some of the women who found themselves in this is they started thinking about their family and their home and becoming very protective of it, and that's why they switch sides.
I know, and I do think that we don't, as a party, talk about that. Like what happens when you don't create paths. And this is one of the reasons that I really think women in office, not just what they bring, and they bring a diversity of thought and experience and perspective. I think about this when I'm folding laundry. When I think about how many of my years, starting as a child, that I have spent folding laundry, and I think there's a lot of men sitting in legislative seats that have never spent literally years of their life folding laundry. And it may seem insignificant, except I share that experience with lots of other people, predominantly women in this country. And that might sound like a silly example, but it's the most telling example that people can plug into right away. All of us have different roles. We come from a different place, and we bring that place we come from with us in our decision making, and how we collaborate, and how we reach out, and how we are proactive in finding solutions for our community. So I guess I'm interested in figuring out how we reframe this conversation so that it's not just about how do we find more women, how do we recruit them and train them to run in a man's world, because clearly that has not really worked very well for us. What would be next steps, or what are you thinking about?
Right, and that's the difficult piece, obviously, that we haven't solved. When we're looking at diversity and just looking, and basically it always seems 17% comes up. 17% of lots of bodies are women, and it's just not okay that it's 50% of the population. And we have people who are well-trained, they want to run, there's enough of them, though they are kind of clustered in areas like this, where we have many women who they're drawn to the big cities or drawn where the jobs are, and they don't want to run around the rest of the state. But there's just something off that we have enough women and we're not electing them in equal numbers that we need to solve. That's not the easy piece. So it's partly, I think most of the women who are running are legitimate. They are qualified. They know what they need to do to win. We talk about the party needs to be supporting them more and getting women the resources that they need and letting them know that they are there for them and can back them up. And part of it is just the voters. There's something with the voters where they're not judging the women the same as they judge men. Whether it's just we're used to men being leaders, as we talked about, we expect women to be more qualified to bring all this in, to reassure us that their kids are not going to be neglected because they're on the campaign trail, and that they will still be going home after the debate and fold the laundry and make sure everything's taken care of, as we all do. And that's just part of life. But there's just something off in why voters, men and women, do not judge women the same. And I got that quite a bit. I've found even, those wonderful 80-year-old women who are so excited about women running and will turn out for any woman. And you get some women who are just like, no, I don't know why you would want to do this. No, I'm not voting for you. And it's very odd that some people don't do it. And I did get the looks when I was younger and people kind of looking you down. I literally had one old man pat me on the head once and say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll vote for you. That's, the good girl kind of idea. But it's very diminishing to be treated a certain way and have people judge you more harshly.
So this brings me to the question of what role do men have to play here? And I use this example, and some people might cry foul. But if you look at apartheid in South Africa, and you ask yourself how a tiny minority of white people controlled a huge country of African Americans, and you look at our party right now, right? And you say to yourself, we've got a tiny, men really, I think somebody said it's 30% of our population are white males now, are actually in the decision-making position. Do we need a greater commitment from the people already sitting at the table who can influence outcomes? Is that a missing piece?
It is, and as we're talking about with the decision today and our work with AGLA and Equality Virginia and being straight women, you need allies who are part of this little piece too, to start spreading the message and bringing these issues forward. Not that it's the most useful piece of it, but they're certainly helpful to have as many people working on these issues as you possibly can. So it is kind of odd that there's still how we look at it, and every time I support another white male candidate, I just kind of think, what am I doing? But it usually is still the best person. I wish I had another choice. That's just the best candidate because no one else has stepped forward.
And that comes down to, what I call institutional bias. And that is, a lot of these men are the best qualified candidates because they have been given opportunities, generally by someone else who pulls them forward, creates a place for them, gives them opportunity, selects them for opportunity. And so you do end up with men at the top who are like, well, they're the ones who have the most experience, the greatest network, the most credibility, the meatiest resume. But how did they get there? And if men can do that for other men, are we missing something in not asking the men sitting at the table in our party to reach back and do the same thing for women, and what would that look like?
And I had that with some of the current delegates when I first went to them and told them I was running. They just asked, but who's supporting you? Like, hopefully you, but I haven't decided yet. It wasn't anybody who anointed me and pulled me forward, and that's what you see a lot of people anointing their successor and bringing them forward, and someone who's been working with them for a while. So something like that not that we want to anoint someone coming forward, but there just needs to be that mentoring, and people can reach out to the strongest people on their campaign, which very often are women, just finding those people and bringing them along and making sure they're exposed to all this. I don't think people need to know every single aspect of campaigning. I don't think that you need to know every nitty-gritty piece to be able to do, an entire mail merge system and cut your turf yourself, but it would help if people just show them it's not scary and bring the women along and be seen with them, to be seen promoting them and talking about them when they're not in the room, and saying, here are all these amazing women who, by the way, that legislation you're praising me for, it was her idea. Something like that, of just wrapping your arm around women and bringing them in.
I think it has to be intentional, and I think that intent is missing. And I think there's something called political capital, and people amass political capital, they expend political capital, and they trade political capital. I liken it to a monopoly game where you've got houses and money and you try to accumulate stuff, so you've got stuff to trade. And there's lots of ways that you accumulate it. But so a great example, and I will use Jared because we both know Jared Nagurka, and I just think he's just, the bee's knees. That really dates me. But the fact of the matter is, he has worked since high school on other people's campaigns. He worked on Patrick Hope's campaign. He's the campaign manager for Rip Sullivan. He started a blog. He's created a conference. I mean, Jared is the sort of person you always want on your team. And he has put in the time, he's put in the effort, and clearly he is building a tremendous amount of political capital, but by design. This is not accidental. He's got ambitions, and rightly so. His passion's in the right place. He's doing it for the right reasons, but he's also early on following the path that will put him where Rip Sullivan and Don Beyer are. I mean, so I don't see, to our point about women and the whole confidence gap, if women aren't stepping up, are we intentionally figuring out a system, a process, a path for people to say, let's find very enthusiastic, and we saw them the other night, very enthusiastic, driven, passionate, ambitious, the same young women that are just like Jared, but are not in the same situation he is, not building the capital, not necessarily having that opportunity to be in a leadership role at their age and their capacity. A solution for that might be?
And that's a problem, and especially being here in Arlington, you have these opportunities that, you're managing campaigns and helping, and you can be as intensely involved as you want to, and we're fine with young people doing it. We rely on the young people to run all the campaigns here. But some of the young women from Richmond, from Roanoke, from other parts of the state we were talking to yesterday, who they didn't know what their next step was. And we had some people like Chanel Herring, who was giving her card out to women and trying to help them along, but someone needs to grab them soon and frequently and keep reminding them, hey, you're going to run for something.
And we are going to come back and talk about that in just a few minutes.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor, It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hello, it's Catherine Reed. I'm back again with my guest, Dix Clifford, and we are talking about women in politics. Our conversation tonight has really run the gamut from one thing to the other. And we talk about it, especially women talk about it a lot, and we still have not quite come up with answers that seem to be pushing the needle forward. I was at a conference today where one of the panelists said, in talking about solving issues of poverty, that stories are more important than theories. And that really resonated with me. It's like, yes, people's stories are more important than us theorizing what it is we think isn't working. So what have we done other than, recruiting women, training women? Are we listening to women's stories?
We are, but I don't know if we're sharing them widely enough. Even when we're going over kind of the history of what's worked for women and what's not, we don't always really remember, and we don't even know where the women came from or our current electeds. We're not bringing those stories forward, but it's translating if maybe your qualifications aren't what people think they are, or they're judging them, but you can tell the stories of your background, your experience, the people you know, their concerns, these things that drove you to run. So when we're talking about an issue like Medicaid expansion, it's one thing to say Medicaid expansion, it's another thing to say this person, this is their story, this is why she's suffering, this is how much it's costing her to support her family and get them care or no care. But something that puts a face on problems is the same that we need to do with women running. Talk about these stories, the women that we've tried, these case studies, lessons learned. I don't think we always share that, and we don't always remember even who did run and come back to them and say, hey, it didn't work this time, try again, here's something else for you. But we kind of stop and start. We have a woman run, she fails, oh well, move on to the next woman, instead of building it up and putting that together, where if there wasn't quite enough this time, you've grown, and maybe next time.
And I think the panel the other night, they did tell kind of their stories, and we had women who ran and didn't win, and we had women who ran and won, Barbara Favola and Jennifer Wexton. And I'm not sure from those stories that we can draw concrete conclusions, but I think it bears trying to figure out what part of those stories are significant. One of the panelists today was also talking about a surprising thing he discovered in looking at communities within the poverty community, and he said, lesbian couples are so disadvantaged because they are women as well as a same-sex couple without any legal rights. He goes, think about it. Women do not have pay equity. They aren't a married couple. They don't have benefits. He goes, lesbian couples are in far more jeopardy financially and economically than their white male same-sex counterparts. And he said that surprised him to discover that. And that also made me think, how many other things are we not asking the right questions? Are we not going about to look at the situation from a totally different perspective to find a different conclusion? Because it seems to me doing more of what is not working is not a good idea. It's not going to get us a different result. So how do we move forward past what we are doing as far as the steps we're taking to figure out a way to innovate, even asking a different question?
I think it's just a lot of conversations, and you mentioned my work on the Arlington Commission on the Status of Women. We're in the process of doing a survey now of actually figuring out what is the status of women in Arlington, because we think everybody has it fine. It's a wealthy, educated community, but we still have the same pay gap that we have everywhere else. And when you mention lesbian couples, issues like benefits are huge issues, and having access to each other's benefits. I mean, my husband and I save a lot of money by sharing a health care plan that not everybody, well, maybe now in Virginia, that they'll have access to. But if they didn't have it before, these things are very costly, or having certain communities not having access to financial services, or having immigrant communities with young women who aren't in a stable home situation, who might be moving from family situation to family situation, where these are all legitimate stories that we should be doing something about, but it's nobody who's at the table who needs to be sharing these stories directly.
Right, and then doesn't this bring us full circle back to our original thesis, point, that we have to have people from those communities, and this was the point this afternoon at this panel, you have to have the people in the community at the table. That's how you figure out why it's happening. This is how you help people collaborate a solution that actually works because they live it. Mm-hmm. And I find politically, we recognize the need to do that, but we're not doing it. And whatever we're doing is not working to get people throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia and in the United States into these seats. And so I'm going to go back to this idea of accountability. So there's a downtown law firm, I think it's Crowell and Moore, who realized that they were recruiting all these wonderfully diverse young women into their firm, but none of them were in the partner leadership track. And they're like, we keep recruiting all these wonderful young women, but they're not moving up. What happens? And he apparently went to some seminar. One of the managing partners went to a seminar where it said, opened his eyes to the fact that you have to be intentional. It's not, to your point, very well, it's not just any woman, but it's looking at the senior partners and saying, out of these wonderful people we've recruited, which one do you want to mentor? Which one do you want to bring along? Which one do you want to take under your wing and put her on the path of ascendancy to a leadership position? And I think it's interesting that that's a law firm. Reed Smith is also the managing partner there, Sandy Thomas, belongs to the 30% Club, which I think was started in the UK. The 30% Club, and you can look them up online, 30% Club, they are businesses, for-profit businesses, committed to having 30% of their leadership be women by 2015. Now that's measurable, that's a commitment. Do you ever see anything like that happening in our party? Locally, statewide?
No. I mean, not that we necessarily want quotas, though it might be a good idea, but no one ever talks about it. We talk about women running, we don't always talk about women elected. We have people complain they can't get good women to run in certain situations, other ones they don't get that support. And no one is really pulling those women forward. I don't know if it's a matter of people not wanting to show favoritism, people get freaked out about primaries and pulling one person forward and setting them up and being ready, but we don't have a pipeline ready, we don't have a succession plan. We just take people as they come. They throw themselves forward. We, as you said, throw them against a wall. Here's a group of women. Let's see who can do it. Maybe if they try hard enough, they can find their own mentors. And once they make it, we'll throw some money at them. But no one is legitimately going out and plucking these women forward and giving them the skills that they need to put them on the right path.
Do you think, and a lot of women truly believe that it's about women helping women. Like Emerge Virginia, it's about women, and they do have men who support them financially and offer expertise. But is it reasonable to think that it based on our experiences, two straight women allies for the LGBT movement, is it realistic to think that we can do this without men?
No. No, it's part of everybody, and it's people who have the power and the power to do something about it who should be doing it. And I don't think a lot of people just recognize that it's a problem. They might think we have enough women. I had someone when I was first running who told me, we don't need another woman from Arlington. Vivian Watts is representing your interests. I'm like, what? She's not even in Arlington. It's not good enough that we have a token number of women as part of this.
Yeah, and I really do think that it comes down to, and I think some of this is a cultural change too. I don't think it's just in politics, it's in business. I went to a conference on nonprofits where one of the biggest breakout sessions was, why don't we have more diversity in nonprofit leadership? So it's not just politics, it's cultural. So how do you change a culture? I mean, where do we start, or do we just start all at once? And since our area of particular interest happens to be politics, how do we move this needle forward? I mean, we've got a few minutes left in this show to turn the world upside down and inside out and suggest a better way of doing it. I don't know if you've got ideas. I sure hope so.
It's really pulling from every part of the circle. If you have children, make sure you're raising your children well, making sure your girls know that every avenue is available to them, get them involved in competitive sports, teach them it's not scary to lose, that they, run for student office, that it isn't that, there's nothing to be afraid of, that they are as competent and capable as anyone else and can be running for these things. And using whatever power you have. I'm perfectly willing to always share any stories I have and any helpfulness to any other women who are going through this, to at least tell them what worked for me, or here's some people, here's some women who I know will step up and help you. I have some wonderful women who every time they see me will be like, so you're gonna run again, right? Okay, really, you're gonna run? And they say it takes 7 times, so this is my 5th time. I'm gonna keep asking you and asking you, but they promise legitimate support too. People will say, when you're ready, I'm here for you and I have a check for you. So it's making legitimate commitments and hopefully coming through, but that's kind of the extent of the power I have. People who have more power than me should be doing more. People who really have party positions, elected positions, who have that, use it and pull more people in.
Well, you bring up a great, and I'm glad you reminded me of this. There is the Center for Women in American Politics is based at Rutgers University, and they have have She Should Run. That is the institute behind She Should Run, which is a nonpartisan women candidate training program. They've just rolled out Teach a Girl to Lead. And I talked to the program director at Teach a Girl to Lead, and they've got online tools, like they've got a toolkit. And I asked them, so how are you reaching girls? I mean, and they're like, well, we're making all of our resources available online, and we have partnered with the Girl Scouts. And I'm like, and that's terrific, but the first alarm bell that went off in my head was Girl Scouts. And this is kind of another middle-class, socioeconomic, not necessarily a terribly diverse organization. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, so how do you reach the kids in foster care and in Title I schools and in the Boys and Girls Club? And she goes, that's a good question. We don't have an answer for that. We would love to find organizations willing to embrace this Teach a Girl to Lead, to take them into the communities that we are talking about. It's not just about any girls, it's about every girl. And especially giving confidence and leadership skills to the most disadvantaged children who also deserve a place at the table and a path to get there. And I think that's my greatest interest in trying to ensure that we have more women in office too, is to make the girls that haven't even been born yet know that it is possible to be in elected office. I mean, I was in 3rd grade and said, in 3rd grade, when somebody said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, President of the United States. And by 5th grade, I'm like, oh wow, girls don't do that. And something, up to this point, I'm 52, girls still don't do that. Hopefully we'll change that in 2016. I'm personally ready for Hillary. I am, and if anybody says she's not qualified, I will meet them in the parking lot, really. Really, don't tell me the woman's not qualified to run. But I do think we have to create these paths for girls. I do think we need to support women who want to run. And I do believe we need to close a confidence gap, not just in politics, but at every level, so that women embrace that resiliency to come back. So tell us, will you be running again, Stephanie?
Yes, as will you, right?
Yes, for something. Yes, so we're both committed. You heard it here right on Inside Scoop that Stephanie and I at some point will be running. We'll be calling you on the phone and telling you we want you to donate to our campaigns, which is our favorite thing to do, right, Stephanie?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us tonight on this important discussion on having women in politics. This has been Inside Scoop. I am your host, Catherine Reed, and I hope that you'll join us again as I'm assuring you that this discussion has not ended. There's a lot more still left to say, and we really want you to join us, be part of the discussion, reach out to us. It's easy to find Stephanie and I, and we'll look forward to talking with